What if the only thing standing between you and the work you're meant to do isn't a lack of money or talent or even a lack of permission? What if it's simply the willingness to be the one who says, go?
It's honestly the great paradox of our time, isn't it? I mean, we have built the largest, cheapest, most accessible economic engine in human history.
Yeah, the tools are everywhere.
Exactly. They are right there. But despite that, most of us are completely paralyzed. We're just standing there waiting for someone else to hand us a map and tell us what to do.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because what we are diving into today is going to fundamentally challenge how you view your career, your daily tasks, and really your whole posture toward the world.
It is a profound shift.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today's deep dive explores this massive transition from an economy of compliance, where you just did what you were told, to a connected economy that absolutely demands initiative.
Right, because traditional business assets, things like capital or distribution, they just aren't enough anymore.
Exactly. And you're going to learn why the most valuable skill in the modern world is the habit of starting. It's about moving beyond just reacting to your to-do list and instead becoming the instigator, the person who, pokes the box and sees what happens.
It really is a complete paradigm shift. For generations, the deal was so simple. Follow the rules, do your work, and you get rewarded.
Go to school, get good grades.
Yeah, the whole 20th century socioeconomic structure was built on that. But those mechanics have fractured. Waiting to be picked is mathematically a losing strategy now.
And to really understand why, we have to look at what we've been taught versus what the world actually requires today. We've basically been handed a playbook.
A very specific set of rules, yeah.
Right, and if we codify those traditional rules, we can call them the 6 imperatives. These are the pillars drilled into us since kindergarten.
And they show up in every performance review you'll ever have. So let's look at them analytically because the historical context is super important here. The first imperative is simply to be aware.
Aware of the market, aware of your surroundings.
Exactly. And the second is to be educated. You need the intellectual capacity to actually understand what you're aware of.
Which is the whole premise of our school system.
Yeah.
Go to college, get the degree, so you can speak the language of your industry.
Precisely. Then you have the third imperative, which is to be connected.
Networking.
Networking, right. Building trust in the market. The fourth one is massive in the industrial mindset. Be consistent.
Because volatility is the enemy of the factory.
Yeah. Your boss, your customers, they need to know exactly what to expect from you every single day. Then the fifth imperative is to build an asset.
Like a physical product or even a highly specialized skill set.
Or an investment portfolio, sure. And finally, the sixth imperative is to be productive. You have to be efficient so your labor is priced competitively.
Okay, but I have to push back here right out of the gate. Because if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, wait a minute. Being productive, educated, consistent. Isn't that the literal definition of a successful career?
It certainly sounds like it.
Right. If I do my job perfectly, if I master all 6 of those things, shouldn't I be bulletproof? Why isn't that enough anymore?
Well, for about 100 years it was. If you worked in a manufacturing plant in 1950, mastering those 6 things was the golden ticket.
It guaranteed middle-class stability.
Absolutely.
Right.
But the economic forces that built that reality have been dismantled. The core argument today is that you can master all 6 imperatives perfectly, and you will still slowly become obsolete.
Wow. Just slowly fade away.
Because those 6 imperatives are entirely defensive. They are about maintaining a steady state in a predictable environment, but our world is not predictable anymore.
It's highly volatile and super connected.
Right. So if you only rely on those 6, you are existing in a state of pure reaction. You are waiting for the world to act on you.
Waiting for the market to tell you what to learn, waiting for the boss to give you a task.
Exactly. Without a proactive spark, you're adrift. You're just waiting to be shoved.
That phrase, pure reaction, that perfectly describes so many modern workdays. You log on, open your email, and you just react to whatever is screaming the loudest.
You're just a router of information.
Yes, and that brings us to the missing piece. The bridge between the industrial era and the connected economy. We call it the 7th imperative.
The willingness to instigate.
To ship. Having the guts and the heart to actually start something, push it out into the world, and accept the feedback.
And the reason this is so rarely taught is because it completely changes your relationship with risk. The first 6 imperatives are all about mitigating risk, right?
Education mitigates incompetence. Consistency mitigates unreliability.
Exactly. But the 7th imperative actively invites risk. It requires stepping out of that safe, predictable workflow. It's a complete psychological shift in your posture.
Let's ground this in reality, because shifting your posture can sound a bit academic. Think about Annie Downs at the Mocha Club.
Oh, that's a great example.
Right, so they're a nonprofit in Nashville. They partner with touring musicians.
Yeah.
And Annie had a standard job. She had her inbox, her deliverables, her 6 imperatives.
A very clear set of rules.
Exactly. But one day, she just picks up the phone, calls her boss, and says 2 sentences that change everything. She says, "I've got an idea, and I'm going to start working on it tomorrow. It won't take a lot of time or money, and I think it's going to work."
The architecture of what she said is just brilliant. Notice what she didn't say. She didn't ask for permission to brainstorm.
She didn't say, "What should I do next?"
No. She stated an intention, she bounded the risk by saying it wouldn't cost much, and she claimed total ownership of the execution.
And the really wild thing, the actual idea doesn't matter.
Mm.
We don't even need to know if it made $1 million or totally flopped.
Because the value wasn't in the specific idea, the value was the transformation of her posture.
Right.
She went from being a compliant worker to an initiator. Organizations, especially big ones, they struggle to generate momentum. Inertia is their default state.
So when someone like Annie generates her own momentum, she's providing this incredibly scarce resource.
Yes. She's willing to fail on behalf of the mission.
So if you're listening to this, you really need to look at your own daily posture. Are you waiting for an agenda to be set for you? When a problem comes up, do you just escalate it and wait?
Or do you propose a solution and ask for forgiveness later?
Exactly. The practical takeaway here is to stop waiting for permission. The connected economy rewards initiators. But to really grasp why this is so valuable, we have to look at how things are actually produced today.
We need to look at the classic elements of production. In traditional business school, they teach you that you need an idea, human capital, physical space, raw materials.
Money, distribution, marketing.
Right, all the inputs. And historically, if you controlled just one of those, you controlled the market.
Like controlling the railroad.
Or the printing press.
Yeah.
And because those things were so scarce, the gatekeepers held all the power. If you wrote a book in 1985, you had to beg a publisher to use their printing press.
You literally had to wait to be picked. But over the last 20 years, those gatekeepers have just collapsed. Look at the encyclopedia industry.
Oh, the Britannica example is brutal.
It is. Britannica had the funding, the authority, a century-old distribution network. But they got totally disrupted by Wikipedia. Just a decentralized network of volunteers using cheap digital infrastructure.
The barriers to entry have dropped to functionally zero. Capital is everywhere. Distribution is basically free.
You can rent AWS server space for pennies. You can spin up a global Shopify store in an afternoon.
We have this frictionless economic machine. But, and this is the core thesis here, all of these cheap elements are completely wasted without a motive force.
Without someone to say go.
Exactly. Without a human being willing to push it into motion, all that infrastructure is just gathering digital dust.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like having a fully built Ferrari, a tank full of gas, and an open highway, but everyone is just sitting in the passenger seat waiting for a driver.
That is exactly what it is. The car can't drive itself.
And to take this from mechanics to biology, the story of Craig Venter is just fascinating here.
Oh, Venter's work in synthetic biology is incredible. So his team, they were pioneers in sequencing the human genome, but they actually figured out how to completely design the genetic code of an organism on a computer.
Which is just mind-bending. They're literally typing out the software of life on a Mac.
Yes. Stringing together base pairs synthetically, and they take this perfectly constructed, chemically accurate code and put it in a petri dish.
It has all the raw materials.
The perfect blueprint.
Yeah.
But here is the aha moment. It just lies there. It doesn't divide. It's not alive.
Yeah.
To go from dead chemistry to a living thing, it requires a motive force.
A spark.
A physical spark.
Yeah.
They have to transplant that synthetic genome into a living host cell that provides the machinery to boot it up. Without that spark, it's inert.
So translate that biological reality for the listener. All around you, your company, your industry, the platforms you use, they are that petri dish.
Yeah.
They are perfectly constructed systems full of latent potential, but they are inert until you bring the spark.
And this completely changes how we should value our own work. We used to think our value was gathering more raw materials.
Getting another degree, making a better spreadsheet.
Exactly, perfecting the petri dish. But the market is flooded with petri dishes. The true scarcity is the willingness to be the spark. Your greatest value is injecting life into stalled projects.
Okay, I get the theory. I need to be the motive force. But let's be practical. If I've spent 20 years in a corporate hierarchy that punishes deviation, I don't just wake up knowing how to be a spark.
No, your instinct is to ask for the manual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we deprogram that? How do we actually learn to initiate?
We have to look at people who inherently navigate without maps, like great computer programmers.
Okay.
When a software engineer builds a complex app, they don't read a 1,000-page manual, memorize the syntax, and type it out flawlessly.
Because the system is too complex. You can't predict how every line of code will interact.
Right. So they use rapid interaction. They write a small block of code, run it, and see what the computer does. Did it crash? Did it work? Then they adjust and run it again.
Call and response.
Exactly. They relentlessly poke the system, and through that friction, they figure out how it operates.
This idea of poking the box reminds me of that story about the homemade toy, the buzzer box.
Oh, the MIT uncle story.
Yeah. So this engineer with a PhD from MIT builds a toy for his baby cousin's crib. But it's this heavy, terrifying metal box with a thick power cord, toggle switches, and indicator lights.
It sounds like a piece of an Apollo control panel.
It really does. And from an adult perspective, it's terrifying. An adult looks at that and asks, where's the safety manual? Am I authorized to touch this?
Because we've been trained to fear unmapped systems.
Right. But a kid has zero concept of industrial compliance. They don't look for a manual. They just start poking it.
They flip a switch, a light comes on, they flip another, a buzzer sounds. If I do this, that happens.
They learn the logic by physically engaging with it.
And what's fascinating here is the psychology of ownership. As soon as we blindly accept the systems given to us, our CRM software, our HR policies, we lose all power.
We treat arbitrary workflows like they are the laws of physics.
Exactly. But poking, testing, modifying, that is the only way we gain influence over our work. You only get confidence by predicting how the box will react to you.
But I want to give you a direct challenge on this, because if I work in compliance for a pharmaceutical company and I start poking the box with patient data, I'm going to get fired or sued.
Right, and that is a crucial distinction. Poking the box does not mean reckless sabotage. You don't poke the foundational regulatory laws of your industry.
Okay.
You poke the internal processes. The tax code is immutable. But the way your firm routes documents, that's constructed. The weekly status meeting, that's entirely arbitrary.
So you apply initiative to the communication structures, the arbitrary constraints.
Exactly. Treat your current job or even your boss as a puzzle. Try a new approach to a routine task just to see the response.
But that leads to another mental block. When we talk about initiators, people picture Elon Musk or Steve Jobs.
They think you need $1 billion in venture capital.
Right. The average person thinks, my idea won't change humanity, so I have no business starting anything. We think initiative requires scale.
And that is a toxic cognitive distortion. Initiative is scale agnostic. You do not need formal authority. A junior data analyst can be an initiator.
Let's visualize that. Say you work in a customer service call center, and the standard script actually makes angry customers more angry.
Which happens all the time.
Right. You don't need a corporate summit to fix it. You just rewrite the first 2 sentences on a sticky note, test it on your next 5 calls, and see if it diffuses the tension.
You just box the buck.
Alter the system, observe the result. It's totally mundane, but incredibly powerful.
Which brings up a fascinating diagnostic question. If these micro improvements are so beneficial, why are they so rare? Why do companies just calcify?
And that plunges us into our final and maybe most important idea, the fear of starting, and why we desperately crave a map.
Think about it. If you ask people in a corporation what their role is, they describe tasks. I sort TPS reports, or I manage supply chains.
But no one ever says, I start stuff.
No one. There is no VP of starting. Because starting implies leaving the map territory, and human beings are neurologically wired to panic when they lose their map.
To really understand that panic, we have to look at human biology. There is this incredible research by Dr. Jan Suman at the Max Planck Institute.
Oh, the navigation study?
Yes. He studied people who were lost in deeply disorienting environments, the dense woods in Germany or the unmapped Sahara Desert.
He took away all their external reference points. No compass, no map. Sometimes it was cloudy, so no sun.
And he told them to just walk in a straight line for a few hours. They were tracked by GPS. Now, rationally, if you're lost, you know walking straight is your best chance of survival.
And the subjects swore they were walking in a straight line.
But the GPS data revealed a profound failure. They didn't walk straight. Human beings literally walk in circles.
It's incredible, and the biological mechanism is so simple. Human locomotion is asymmetrical. One leg is usually a tiny bit stronger or longer than the other.
Right.
When you have a visual anchor, like a mountain, your brain constantly microcorrects your stride. But without an anchor, that feedback loop breaks.
So that tiny 1% asymmetry compounds.
Exactly. Every step you veer fractions of a degree. Within an hour, you've walked a perfect circle and ended up right back where you started, completely exhausted.
So what does this all mean? How does the desert survival study map onto a corporate cubicle?
It means our craving for a map isn't a lack of willpower, it's a primal survival instinct. We are terrified of walking in circles.
So we wait. We wait for the CEO's vision. We wait for the industry benchmark.
We cling to the known routine, even if it's failing, because it provides a map. But if you understand this, it is the ultimate leadership hack in the connected economy.
Because everyone around you has that same primal fear. The demand for maps is infinitely high.
Exactly. If you are brave enough to draw a map, even an imperfect one, people will naturally follow you. Leadership belongs to the map makers, not the map readers.
And look, we have to be honest. Poking the box, drawing a map, most of your initial assumptions will be wrong. The friction is real. But you have to evaluate this like an actuary.
The asymmetric risk profile.
Right. When the cost of poking the box is less than the cost of doing nothing, it is your imperative to poke.
Unless you run a nuclear power plant, the cost of failure for a knowledge worker is negligible. An awkward conversation, maybe.
But the systemic risk of doing nothing in a fast-moving economy, that is fatal.
The cost of being average while the world adapts is obsolescence. We confuse the discomfort of movement with fatal risk.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground today. Let's synthesize this. We are essentially dismantling a century of industrial conditioning,
We were trained to wait for the factory foreman, but the factory is gone.
replaced by this giant inert petri dish of cheap tools and endless connectivity. The true scarcity in your highest value is the willingness to be the motive force.
It's the courage to walk up to the buzzer box of your career, ignore the fear of making a mistake, and press the button just to see what happens.
Nobody is coming to discover you. You have to pick yourself.
And that leaves us with a really challenging thought to mull over. If the cost of trying something new and failing is so much lower today than the cost of doing nothing, why does our internal alarm bell still ring so loudly when we even think about stepping out of line?
That is the defining tension right there. Now that we know why we have to start poking the box, what happens when we face that loud voice in our own heads begging us to stop? Join us next time on The Deep Dive as we explore the psychology of the lizard brain and learn how to make starting a sustainable way of life. Keep poking the box, and we'll see you next time. When was the last time you did something for the very first time? Think about it for a second.
Oh, that's a tough question.
Right. We live in a world where you have, infinite access, information, tools, platforms, audiences. You literally carry a device in your pocket that can reach 1 billion people in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, the capital is all just sitting there.
Exactly. So what is the single invisible barrier keeping you from being the person who actually makes things happen?
It's the kind of question that forces a fairly uncomfortable self-audit, honestly, because if we are being truly honest with ourselves, looking past the day-to-day busyness and the endless to-do lists, the answer for most of us is that it has been a very, very long time since we stepped into the unknown.
We confuse being active with taking initiative.
Absolutely. We confuse motion with action.
And the reason for that paralysis, isn't a lack of resources, and it certainly isn't a lack of intelligence. Today, in this deep dive, we are pulling from a massive stack of research. We're looking at everything from evolutionary biology and behavioral psychology to the early corporate histories of Pixar and Starbucks.
Oh, the Starbucks story is wild. We'll get to that.
We will definitely get to that. But the overarching mission of this deep dive is to deconstruct a rather bold truth. And that truth is that we have been systematically brainwashed.
Brainwashed by an industrial economy that is, frankly, fading away.
Right. We are the products of a system that spent a century conditioning us to wait for permission, to fear any unscripted movement, to obsess over just meeting spec. But the paradigm has completely shifted. Quality is no longer a differentiator.
No, it's a baseline commodity now.
Exactly. And so the most valuable skill in the modern economy is the sheer willingness to say go, to just start.
And that's the core of it. We are operating with a map drawn for a world that simply no longer exists. We don't even realize how deeply we've internalized this idea that we need a green light from some authority figure.
Yeah, a boss or a publisher or something.
Right. We are basically standing at an intersection where the traffic signals were dismantled like a decade ago, but we were still idling at the stop line, gripping the steering wheel, just hoping someone in a uniform will wander by and wave us through.
Which means we need to completely redefine what it means to take initiative. Because the very first roadblock we run into when we talk about starting is this pervasive cultural myth of the outsized entrepreneur.
Oh, I hate this myth so much.
It's so damaging, right?
Yeah.
We've constructed this bizarre binary where you are either a normal employee doing your normal job, or you are Howard Schultz dreaming up a global coffee empire.
Or you're some tech visionary ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange.
Exactly. We've convinced ourselves that starting requires, I don't know, a multi-million-dollar factory, a board of directors, and this massive appetite for financial ruin.
And we lionize those massive figures, those billionaires, specifically to let ourselves off the hook.
Wait, really? To let ourselves off the hook?
Yeah, think about it. By putting the act of starting on this unreachable pedestal, we create a really convenient excuse for our own inaction. We tell ourselves, well, I don't want to mortgage my house and sleep under a desk in Silicon Valley, so I guess I have no business initiating anything.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Right. We fooled ourselves into believing that a project only qualifies as starting if it comes with a corporate letterhead and a stock ticker symbol. But the reality buried in these case studies completely dismantles that myth.
Because starting isn't about the scale of the operation at all.
Not even a little bit. It's a behavioral shift. It's a posture. It's the conscious decision to move from a state of reacting to incoming stimuli, answering emails, going to meetings, doing assigned tasks, to instigating action.
And there's this great story in the research about Annie Downs that illustrates this perfectly. She worked at the Mocha Club, which is a nonprofit in Nashville that partners with touring musicians to raise money for the developing world.
Great organization.
Yeah, by all accounts, doing incredibly meaningful work. But even in a nonprofit, you can so easily fall into a reactive holding pattern.
Oh, absolutely. You show up, you look at your inbox, you handle whatever crisis of the day popped up, you execute the standard operating procedures. The system dictates your output.
But Annie did something remarkably simple that completely severed that reactive loop. She called her boss and uttered 2 sentences she had never used before.
I love this part.
She said, I've got an idea, and I'm going to start working on it tomorrow. It won't take a lot of time, and it won't cost a lot of money, and I think it's going to work.
That is profound.
It is, and naturally, the first thing anyone listening wants to know is, well, what was the idea? Was it brilliant? Did it raise $1 million?
Which completely misses the point.
Totally misses the point. Delving into the specifics of her project entirely distracts from what actually happened. The specific idea doesn't matter in the slightest.
Right. What matters is the crossing of that psychological threshold. In those 2 sentences, she wasn't asking for an assignment. She wasn't begging for a budget. She took the initiative rather than waiting to be handed it.
She assumed the posture of someone who starts things.
Yes. And by doing that, she accepted the vulnerability that her idea might fail, but she prioritized the forward momentum of the organization over her own comfort.
And we see this dynamic play out in incredibly small, hyperlocal ways every single day. The sources highlight these micro-examples that are so mundane, they are almost painful to acknowledge.
They really are. They're the everyday things we walk right past.
Like the receptionist who notices that the standard corporate greeting makes angry callers even angrier. So they experiment with a completely different, calmer way to answer the phone and then teach it to the rest of the staff.
Or the person who steps up to help a stranger struggling with a heavy tray in a crowded hospital cafeteria.
Or, my absolute favorite example, the person who finally brings in a tiny drop of oil to fix the squeaky door hinge that has been driving the entire office insane for 6 months.
The squeaky hinge. It's the ultimate litmus test for organizational paralysis.
It physically hurts to point out how obvious the solution is, right? It takes 30 seconds. It takes $1 worth of lubricant.
Yet, an office full of highly educated, well-compensated professionals will endure that screeching door for half a year.
Why does it do that?
Because of the industrial age brainwashing. For generations, the factory model demanded compliant cogs. The system explicitly rewarded you for doing exactly what was in your job description, no more, no less.
Stay in your lane.
Exactly. Our education systems, with all their standardized tests and bell curves, and our corporate structures with rigid org charts, have deeply trained us to utter the four most destructive words in the English language.
That's not my job.
That's not my job. Exactly.
But hold on, let me push back here. Let's explore the reality of a modern workplace for a second.
Hmm.
If I'm a middle manager, and suddenly my entire team starts acting like the CEO, if they're running around rewriting customer service scripts, abandoning their desks to help people in the cafeteria, and oiling hinges instead of filing the quarterly reports, doesn't the actual core function of the business just collapse?
That's the classic fear, right?
Yeah, how do we separate high-value initiative from just chaotic distraction?
It's the standard fear of the managerial class. If I let go of the reins, the horses will run off a cliff. But taking initiative isn't a license to abandon your core responsibilities. It's a mandate to elevate them.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
The distinction lies in the intention and the outcome. The person fixing the hinge isn't ignoring their spreadsheets. They are removing a layer of ambient friction that is degrading everyone's focus. And the receptionist changing the phone script. They are actually making their core job, which is resolving customer issues, drastically more effective. Initiative isn't about creating chaos. It is about claiming extreme ownership of the physical and operational space you occupy.
Looking at the gap between what is happening and what could be happening,
Yeah.
and independently bridging that gap.
Precisely.
So, if you are listening to this and wondering where to begin, the takeaway is profoundly liberating. You do not need a 50-page slide deck or a venture capital backer or an executive mandate. You can look around your immediate environment right now.
Your office, your neighborhood, your household.
Yeah, and identify one squeaky hinge. Find one microscopic friction point that you can resolve without asking for a single shred of permission.
You provide the spark. You become the motive force, which naturally leads us to a much deeper economic question.
Right.
If starting is mechanically as simple as oiling a hinge, why is that spark so unbelievably rare?
That's the paradox.
To understand the deficit of initiative, we have to look at how we've been educated to view the elements of production.
Let's get into the seventh imperative. Because if you open any traditional business textbook or listen to Wall Street analysts, there is a total obsession with 6 fundamental inputs.
Yes, the classic 6.
Right. If you want to build something, you are told you need an idea. You need people to work on it. You need a physical place to organize it. You need raw materials. You need a distribution channel. And you need money or marketing to fuel it.
Our entire corporate vernacular is built around mastering those elements. We are taught 6 corresponding imperatives.
Right.
Be aware of the market conditions. Be educated so you understand the technical landscape. Be connected so you have a network of trust. Be consistent so the supply chain knows what to expect. Build an asset so you have equity to sell. And be productive so your pricing remains competitive.
Bosses, professors, consultants that build multi-billion-dollar industries helping you optimize those 6 imperatives.
You can spend a lifetime optimizing them. But here is the devastating reality that the modern economy has laid bare. You can possess every single one of those elements in absolute perfection.
Flawless idea, infinite funding.
A state-of-the-art factory, seamless distribution, unparalleled consistency, and you will still fail spectacularly.
Because all 6 of those inputs are completely useless without the 7th imperative.
The 7th imperative is the motive force. It is the guts, the audacity, the unquantifiable drive to actually ignite the project.
There is an incredible analogy in the research regarding Craig Venter. He's the scientist who led the first draft sequence of the human genome.
Oh, this is a brilliant comparison.
Venter and his team possess technology that honestly sounds like science fiction. They can sit at a computer, design the genetic code of an organism keystroke by keystroke, and essentially print that synthetic DNA into a petri dish.
The raw materials of life itself completely engineered and assembled.
Yeah. But what happens to that printed genetic code once it's in the dish?
Absolutely nothing.
It just sits there.
It is a completely inert blob of chemicals. It is not alive. It cannot divide. It cannot grow. It cannot function until Venter introduces a living cellular chassis, a motive force to boot up that DNA.
The raw materials are meaningless without the spark of life to activate them.
And that petri dish is the absolute perfect metaphor for the global economy today. We've constructed the most massive, efficient, frictionless economic engine in human history.
The raw materials are cheaper and more abundant than at any point since the dawn of civilization.
Exactly. A factory in Shenzhen can manufacture your prototype for a fraction of what it cost 10 years ago. You no longer need to own a television network to reach 100 million people.
You just need a camera and an internet connection.
The capital is sitting in bank accounts, desperate for a return. The global market is hovering over the buy button.
But they're all just inert genetic code waiting in the dish. The factories, the servers, the supply chains, they are waiting for someone to provide the motive force. They're waiting for you to say go.
It's as if we've spent our entire lives meticulously building a high-performance sports car. We've sourced the best racing tires, we've formulated the optimal fuel mixture, we've polished the aerodynamic chassis in a wind tunnel.
But no one ever bothered to teach us how to put the key in the ignition and turn it.
We are just sitting in the driveway admiring our own potential.
And when you are sitting in a highly advanced machine without knowing how to turn it on, the human default is paralysis.
Without an instruction manual, our instincts betray us. There is fascinating behavioral research by Dr. Jan Suman at the Max Planck Institute that perfectly illustrates this.
The Sahara Desert study, right?
Yes. He studied the navigation patterns of humans when they are lost in environments devoid of external cues. So imagine a dense forest or the Sahara Desert on a cloudy day without a map, compass, or visible sun.
You would think that survival instinct kicks in and you just pick a direction and walk in a straight line to get out.
That's exactly what the subjects believed they were doing. But GPS tracking showed that without a map, humans inherently walk in tight, overlapping circles.
Wow, in circles.
Despite our best intentions, without an external guide telling us exactly where to go, we expend massive amounts of energy only to end up exactly where we started. Human nature craves the map.
Which means your primary job in today's economy is no longer gathering resources. Stop trying to build a better petri dish. Stop hoarding raw materials and polishing your inputs. You have enough.
Your job is to be the map maker. Your job is to provide the spark that jolts those inert materials into motion.
But becoming the map maker, becoming the person who turns the key, requires a radical unlearning of how we interact with our environment. We have to learn how to operate without a manual. We have to adopt the mindset of a computer programmer.
I love this concept of the buzzer box.
Oh, the buzzer box is such a great mental model. When someone decides to learn to code, they don't sit down, read a 1,000-page theoretical manual from cover to cover, and then effortlessly type out a flawless piece of software.
That's not how it works at all.
No. They learn by poking the box. They write a line of code, and they hit execute just to see what the computer does. When it spits out an error, they change a variable and hit execute again.
They poke the system, observe the reaction, adjust, and poke again. It is a relentless cycle of call and response.
And that iterative poking creates a profound sense of ownership over the system.
The research shares a deeply illustrative story about an uncle with a PhD from MIT. When his nephew was born, instead of buying a plush toy, this uncle built a literal buzzer box and placed it in the baby's crib.
In the crib.
Yes, in the crib. It was this heavy metal contraption with a thick black cord plugged into the wall, covered in toggle switches, indicator lights, and a loud buzzer. It looked like a control panel ripped out of a submarine.
Which objectively sounds like a terrifying thing to leave alone with an infant.
To an adult raised in a liability-obsessed culture, yes, it's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
But to a child whose brain is entirely unconditioned by fear, it's just a puzzle. The child doesn't wait for a user manual, they just start poking. They discover that flipping the left switch turns on a red light. Flipping the right switch sounds the buzzer. Flipping both creates a new pattern.
Cause and effect.
Exactly. That is the purest form of learning, interacting directly with the environment before the world trains us to be terrified of breaking the rules.
Life is a buzzer box. The market you are trying to sell to is a buzzer box. The corporate hierarchy you are trying to navigate is a buzzer box. You don't map it by studying it from afar. You solve the puzzle by physically poking it and measuring the feedback.
But instead of poking the box, the vast majority of us succumb to a debilitating psychological condition that the research labels the pick-me syndrome.
Pick-me syndrome.
Yes. We voluntarily surrender all of our agency by waiting for an external authority figure to validate our existence. We write a manuscript and let it gather dust while we wait for a massive publishing house to pick us. We wait for the venture capitalist to deem our startup worthy. We sit in our cubicles waiting for the executive team to pick us for the promotion or invite us to lead the meeting.
Let's contrast two specific archetypes here, because it makes it so clear. Think about someone like Jessica, who is a masterful, highly competent conference organizer. She knows how to negotiate venue contracts, she can wrangle speakers, she executes the logistics flawlessly.
A total pro.
But Jessica's entire career is dependent on waiting for an event promoter to hire her. She has to polish her resume, pitch her services, and hope she gets picked.
And on the flip side, you have someone like the legendary promoter Jerry Weintraub. Weintraub didn't concern himself with arranging the folding chairs or checking the microphone cables. He initiated the entire project.
He envisioned the tour.
He booked the talent. He created the momentum. He held the power because he refused to wait in line to be picked. He was the one actively doing the picking.
Is the pick-me mindset just a manifestation of laziness? Or is there something deeper going on? Because if I'm playing amateur psychologist for a second, it feels like waiting to be picked is actually an incredibly sophisticated defense mechanism.
Oh, 100%.
Right. It shields our ego from the raw, unfiltered vulnerability of standing out. If I am Jessica, the organizer, and the conference is a total disaster and no one buys tickets, I can say, hey, the lighting was great, the catering was on time, I executed my task perfectly, the promoter just had a terrible idea.
It is the ultimate ego shield. The pick-me syndrome is so pervasive because it feels incredibly safe. It effectively outsources the blame for failure.
Wow.
If you wait to be picked by a publisher and they reject your manuscript, you get to play the victim. You can say the industry is rigged, the editors lack vision, it's their fault.
Yeah, it's never your fault.
And even more insidiously, if they do pick you and the book completely bombs in the market, you can still rationalize that it was the publisher's fault for not marketing it correctly, or that they were the experts who vetted it in the first place, so the failure is shared.
As long as we require someone else's stamp of approval to begin, we never truly own our work. We are merely renting space in someone else's vision.
Which means the mandate for anyone listening is to actively reject the tyranny of being picked. You must treat your immediate environment like that heavy metal buzzer box.
Poke the box.
Poke your customer base with a tiny, unsolicited prototype. Pitch an unorthodox idea to your manager. Launch the Substack, see how the box reacts, internalize the feedback, and take absolute ownership of the outcome.
And the fascinating thing is, the moment you decide to reject the pick-me mentality and just pick yourself, you realize something shocking about the resources you thought you lacked.
The things you thought were holding you back aren't actually the things that matter anymore.
We tell ourselves we can't start because we lack capital. But we are defining capital through an incredibly outdated industrial-era lens.
Let's audit the traditional forms of capital that have dictated business success for the last 2 centuries. You have financial capital, which is just money in the bank. You have network capital, your access to exclusive distribution channels or powerful politicians.
There's intellectual capital, patents, proprietary software, specialized degrees, physical capital, the heavy machinery, the fleet of delivery trucks, the prime real estate.
And finally, prestige capital, the century-old brand reputation that makes people trust you blindly.
For generations, those 5 forms of capital were impenetrable moats protecting the corporate castle. If you owned the massive factory and had the recognizable brand name, no upstart competitor could possibly touch you.
But the connected economy has completely inverted that power dynamic. The research argues that the most critical currency in the modern landscape is none of those traditional forms. The supreme currency today is instigation capital.
Instigation capital. The sheer, unadulterated desire to move forward. The guts to say yes when everyone else is forming a committee to study the problem.
Right.
Why has this suddenly become the most valuable asset?
Because the velocity of change has shattered the old models of innovation. In a localized village economy, you could invent a slightly more durable horseshoe, patent it, and comfortably ride the profits of that single innovation for the rest of your life.
The market was small, information traveled slowly.
Exactly, and your competitors lack the means to rapidly reverse engineer your success.
But we don't live in a village anymore. We live in Google world.
Google world is ruthless. The universe of competitors is practically infinite. A breakthrough in Tokyo is analyzed in London and replicated in Austin within 24 hours.
Oh.
The state of the art is globally visible in real time. Consequently, the half-life of any innovation is shrinking exponentially. The days of innovating once and coasting on the intellectual property are over.
To visualize this, the sources bring up the iconic I Love Lucy episode at the chocolate factory.
Everyone knows that scene.
Right. Lucy and Ethel are working the assembly line, and the conveyor belt starts speeding up. When we say you need to move faster in Google world, We do not mean you should act like Lucy, frantically stuffing chocolates into your mouth, down your shirt, and into your hat, just to keep pace with a crazed, never-ending stream of tasks.
That is the industrial definition of speed, doing the exact same rote tasks at a higher velocity until you burn out.
In the connected economy, faster means shortening the cycle of innovation. It means developing an obsession with tweaking the status quo, not because the system is completely broken, but merely to see what happens when you introduce a new variable.
The old forms of capital were defensive modes. Instigation capital is offensive. It's the ability to build a bridge across the chasm faster than your entrenched competitor can dig a wider moat.
And we can actually quantify the value of this instigation. Robert Litton at the Brookings Institution analyzed economic data and found a staggering trend. Virtually all net new job growth in the United States occurs within the first 5 years of a company's existence.
Wait, really? The massive Fortune 500 conglomerates aren't the ones driving job growth?
No, they are generally maintaining or shrinking their workforces. The growth happens in the first 5 years because that is the period of maximum instigation.
That makes total sense. In the early days of a startup, everyone is floundering. There are no rigid job descriptions. The marketing person is helping with product design. The founder is doing customer support.
Everyone is cross-pollinating, experimenting, and poking the box just to survive.
But once a company finds its footing and achieves stability, a lethal comfort sets in. They stop initiating. They transition from inventing new roles to merely replacing the cogs that fall out of the machine.
They completely drain their reservoir of instigation capital. But look at a company that actively fought against that stagnation, like Google in its prime. What separated Google from early web casualties like Yahoo or Netscape?
Right. When Google's search engine became a monolithic cash cow, they didn't just sit back, fire the innovators, and hire managers to maximize the yield of that one product.
They ignored Wall Street analysts who told them to play it safe. They continuously funneled billions into wild, unprecedented projects, mapping the globe, building mobile operating systems, experimenting with self-driving cars.
They institutionalized the act of starting.
They embraced what the research calls the double-double mindset. If you achieve success, doubling your pace or your market share once is no longer sufficient to guarantee survival.
You have to double and then double again. You have to begin starting on your way to starting yet again. You have to innovate on your way to innovating.
So, practically speaking, you cannot rest on your laurels. Your past successes are a depreciating asset. You must adopt the double-double mentality. Even when your career or your business is thriving, you have to be the one who initiates the next disruption before the market aggressively forces it upon you.
Which forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable paradox. If continuous, relentless instigation is the only viable survival strategy in the modern economy, why do we hesitate?
Why do we fight tooth and nail to maintain the status quo and stand perfectly still?
Because we have a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of the nature of risk. The sources point out that we constantly confuse the ambient movement of the modern world, which is simply flux, with actual personal danger, which is risk.
We need to untangle those two concepts because conflating them is paralyzing.
Flux is just flow. It is the natural state of change in the universe. Imagine dropping an ice cube into a hot cup of tea. The heat transfers from the water to the ice. The molecular structure changes. The ice melts.
The system is in flux.
But there is no inherent risk in that movement. Risk, on the other hand, involves making a wager. It involves putting something valuable at stake where you might experience a catastrophic loss.
But because our society has conditioned us to experience immense anxiety over any potential failure, we have generalized that fear. We now view any movement, any flux, as a potential risk of collision.
So our logical yet flawed solution is to stand completely still. We decide to be a rock in a flowing river. We tell ourselves, if I don't move, if I just keep my head down and do my job exactly as described, I am safe.
But here's the flaw in that physics. If the entire world around you is in a state of rapid flux, and you are standing perfectly still, you are actually moving backward relative to your environment.
And worse, being a stationary rock in a rushing, turbulent river guarantees that you are going to take a beating.
The water is going to crash over you. Debris is going to smash into you. The current will eventually erode you. Collisions are absolutely inevitable if you try to remain stationary in a world defined by flux.
Contrast that with the person who initiates. The person who embraces the flux is like a log floating down that exact same river.
Yes, the log is in motion. It is changing locations rapidly.
But relative to the water immediately surrounding it, the log is experiencing a state of calm. It is moving with the current, avoiding the violent collisions that the rock endures.
That is a phenomenal visualization. The initiator experiences peace, while the compliant worker experiences constant turbulence.
It's true.
But we have a very sophisticated way of hiding from the flux. We use the illusion of quality as our primary excuse not to innovate.
The definition of quality has undergone a massive evolution, and we are stuck in the previous era. A century ago, quality simply meant good enough to function.
Then, the quality control revolution, spearheaded by W. Edwards Deming, transformed manufacturing, and quality came to mean absolutely without defects.
Six Sigma, zero variations. And for a time, that was a massive competitive advantage. But today, flawless, defect-free quality is just the baseline requirement for entry. It is a commodity.
It's totally assumed. When you buy a new car, you don't marvel that it starts when you turn the key. When you buy an iPad, you expect the screen to be pristine. We are actually shocked and offended when we find a typo in a published book or a brand new battery dies prematurely.
Because defect-free quality is a given, if all you have to offer the market or your employer is meeting spec, you are selling a commodity. And the brutal truth of economics is that the market only does one thing with commodities.
It relentlessly demands a cheaper price.
If your only value proposition is that you do exactly what you were told without making errors, someone in another country or an algorithm will eventually do it cheaper. You cannot win a race to the bottom.
Which brings us to the devastating consequences of what the research calls the pit boss brainwashing. There are certain industries that demanded ultimate compliance over initiative.
Casinos need dealers who follow the exact mathematical protocols to preserve the house edge. NASA needs astronauts who follow checklists so they don't blow up in the vacuum of space. Detroit auto manufacturers needed assembly line workers to install the exact same bolt thousands of times a day.
And what happened? The management in these industries yelled at and punished workers for deviating until the unions finally threw up their hands and said, fine.
Yeah.
We will do exactly the minimum required by the manual and not 1 ounce more.
The factory owners willingly traded the infinite upside of human curiosity and improvement for the sterile certainty of compliance. They embraced the bland. They institutionalized mediocrity.
Now, hold on. Let's inject some common sense here. You just mentioned NASA and casino pit bosses. We do need strict compliance in those scenarios, don't we? I mean, I certainly do not want my astronaut getting bored and deciding to poke the box by opening the airlock halfway to Mars just to see what happens.
No, definitely not.
How do we reconcile the absolute necessity of safety and rigorous compliance in high-stakes environments with this sweeping mandate for instigation?
It is a vital distinction. The argument is not that we should abandon safety protocols and just wing it at the nuclear power plant.
Right.
The routine execution of highly dangerous, established tasks absolutely requires strict compliance. The danger arises when the compliance necessary for the assembly line is allowed to infect the culture of the entire organization.
Oh, okay.
The astronaut must follow the checklist, yes. But the design of the spacecraft, the innovation of the propulsion system, the reimagining of the mission parameters, those require radical instigation.
The tragedy of the modern corporation is that we have taken the rigid compliance required for the factory floor and applied it to marketing, to product development, to strategy, and to customer service.
We have killed curiosity in the exact areas where it is most desperately needed.
And as consumers, we have become numb to this mediocrity. We get visibly angry when systems are totally broken, like when an airline loses our luggage or a government website crashes. But we silently, passively accept a world flooded with mediocre, generic, uninspired products and services that just do what they're supposed to do.
We have completely lost our demand for the remarkable.
To illustrate what we've lost, the research uses the example of a company called Penguin Magic. If you watch a highly skilled magician on the street perform a stunning, reality-bending illusion, the audience gasps, and their immediate involuntary reaction is to ask, how did you do that?
That is the sound of genuine curiosity being sparked. But in our professional lives, we have been so heavily indoctrinated to accept the bland status quo that if a colleague performs a technical miracle or fundamentally improves a process, we don't ask how. We just shrug, say neat, and go back to our inboxes.
To survive and thrive in Google World, we have to actively seek the remarkable. And being remarkable inherently demands curiosity and instigation.
So the practical checkpoint for you here is to rigorously audit your own behavior. Recognize when you are using flawless quality or I met the spec as a defensive shield to hide behind.
Stop trying to be the unmoving rock taking a daily beating from the current Embrace the flux, become the log, and learn to navigate the river.
But acknowledging the river is only half the battle. To actually step into the flux, we have to confront something very dark, very primitive, and deeply ingrained within our own biology.
Right, we have to confront the forces that are literally screaming at us from the inside out to avoid failure at all costs.
Hmm.
We are diving into the epidemic of the lizard brain.
This isn't just a metaphor, it is neurobiology. Scientists can pinpoint exactly where this resistance lives in our heads. It is the amygdala, the prehistoric evolutionary core of our brain.
The exact same anatomical structure you would find in a lizard, a bird, or a deer.
For millions of years, the sole function of the lizard brain was to ensure survival and reproduction. It is obsessed with fear, danger, and the avoidance of risk. The author Stephen Pressfield famously labeled the voice of this lizard brain the resistance.
And the resistance is actively chattering away at you right now. It is the voice urging you to compromise, telling you not to speak up in the meeting, warning you that rash moves will lead to your social, professional destruction.
And what makes it so difficult to overcome is that society acts as a massive echoing amplifier for this lizard brain. We have developed a cultural obsession with what the research calls the failure dance.
The failure dance.
Yes, when someone steps out of line, tries something new, and fails when a politician stumbles during a debate, or a highly publicized startup crashes and burns, society gleefully circles the wagons and points fingers.
We revel in this schadenfreude. We write think pieces dissecting their hubris. The victory dance feels like arrogant bragging. But the failure dance is a socially acceptable communal pastime.
We use the failure of others to validate our own decision to stay safely on the couch.
Because the failure dance is so loud and pervasive, we erroneously conclude that a career built on initiative is a tragic path, doomed to end in public humiliation. We think successful people must possess some magical ability to avoid failure entirely.
But if you actually study the trajectories of people who have made massive culture-shifting impacts, you uncover something entirely different. You find a long, jagged, exhausting trail of spectacular failures.
It is the ultimate open secret. Look at Oprah Winfrey, Mark Cuban, Dr. Mehmet Oz,
Steve Carell.
Steve Carell. If you dig into their resumes, they all have incredibly long lists of failed shows, bankrupted businesses, rejected pilots, and public missteps. But society doesn't keep a permanent ledger of those failures. We only track and celebrate their compounding successes.
Failure is not a bug in the operating system of initiative. It is a fundamental, required feature. You cannot construct a career of instigation without it. The research provides an incredible historical example with the original Starbucks located in Pike Place Market in Seattle.
Most people don't realize that the original iteration of Starbucks was not a coffee shop at all.
This detail completely rewired my understanding of business success. Jerry Baldwin, one of the original founders, was, by modern standards, completely and utterly wrong in his initial vision.
The original Starbucks only sold roasted coffee beans, loose tea leaves, and spices. They did not sell a single cup of brewed coffee.
They certainly didn't sell espresso.
And they definitely didn't have Wi-Fi or comfortable chairs. If Baldwin and his partners had stubbornly clung to that original perfect model, the company would have either gone bankrupt or remained a tiny, obscure local curiosity.
The initial model was empirically wrong. But, and this is the crux of the entire philosophy, without that wrong start, Howard Schultz never would have been hired. He never would have taken the fateful buying trip to Italy. He never would have become obsessed with the communal culture of Italian espresso bars. He never would have bought the company, and the Frappuccino wouldn't exist.
The wrong start was an absolute structural necessity to eventually discover the right outcome. The action had to precede the clarity.
Or look at the genesis of Pixar. In 1984, John Lasseter pushed the boundaries of early computer animation to create a digital short film called The Adventures of Andre and Wally B.
It was weird. The animation was rudimentary by today's standards, and apparently it completely freaked out his young son. It didn't become a feature film. It generated absolutely zero revenue.
By every standard corporate metric of quality and return on investment, it was a colossal mistake. But by making that mistake, Lasseter figured out the physics of digital storytelling. He now has multiple Academy Awards and built Pixar into an untouchable titan of modern cinema.
This brings us face to face with a phrase that our lizard brains are programmed to dread. This might not work.
Oh, that phrase.
In the industrial mindset, that phrase is a red flag to halt production. But the text argues that this might not work isn't something we should merely tolerate. It is a condition we must actively seek out.
If you are only undertaking projects that are 100% guaranteed to work, you are not initiating. You are just coasting on established paradigms. You are managing, not instigating.
It perfectly explains the paradox of success. People who lack resources or connections struggle immensely to get the leverage needed to bring their ideas to the world. But conversely, people with massive resources, funding, and established credibility often become so terrified of losing their status that they become completely paralyzed.
They stop taking risks. They stop looking at projects and saying, this might not work.
And the moment you stop saying that, your instigation capital drops to zero, and you begin the slow process of obsolescence.
It makes me think of the mechanics of throwing a baseball. If you want to pitch in the major leagues, you can't just sit in a pristine classroom for 10 years studying the physics of velocity, the aerodynamics of the seams, and the kinesiology of the human shoulder, and then expect to step onto a mound for the very first time and throw a perfect 90-mile-per-hour strike.
It is physically impossible. You have to go outside into the dirt. You have to throw poorly. You have to throw wild pitches into the backstop. You have to look foolish, adjust your grip, and throw again.
You have to get good at the act of throwing first. If you relentlessly practice the throwing, the accuracy of the catching takes care of itself.
That analogy cuts right to the core of it. The messy, uncoordinated action must precede the mastery. But here's the trap. If you accept that you need to act, how do you ensure you actually step onto the mound? Because if you leave it up to how you feel in the moment, you will never do it. You have to outsmart your lizard brain.
Right, because if you wait for a burst of divine inspiration to strike, the resistance will calmly step in and tell you that you should really clear out your email inbox first, or that you need to reorganize your desktop folders, or that you should just take a quick nap to refresh your mind.
The author mentions Zig Ziglar's profound advice here. You have to make your schedule before you start the work.
The science fiction legend Isaac Asimov is the ultimate embodiment of this principle. Asimov wrote and published more than 400 books across wildly different genres in his lifetime.
400 books.
How is that level of output humanly possible? By removing the decision-making process entirely. For 40 years, Asimov sat at his typewriter and typed non-stop from 6 a.m. to noon every single day, regardless of whether he felt inspired or whether the writing was good.
He didn't wait to be picked by the muse. He rigorously scheduled his instigation. He battered the lizard brain into submission through sheer scheduled repetition.
So the tactical maneuver for you right now is to actively schedule your starts. Treat doing something new not as a whimsical creative exercise, but as a non-negotiable calendar appointment. Block out Tuesday at 9:00 a.m. to poke the box, and do not move that appointment regardless of how loud the lizard brain screams at you to seek the safety of routine tasks.
But as we dive into this final, critical phase of the deep dive, we have to establish a hard-line boundary around what starting actually means. It is very easy to get a hit of dopamine by buying a fresh Moleskine notebook, holding a brainstorming session, and generating a million brilliant ideas on a whiteboard.
Oh, that feels so good.
But true instigation, the kind that changes the economy and builds capital, demands an intersection with the real world.
Yes. Starting implies no, the research is far more aggressive than that. Starting demands finishing.
Exactly. We have to decouple the word starting from the concept of a singular kickoff event. Starting is not a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It is a grueling series of continuous events. And crucially, if the project doesn't ship, if it doesn't get published, launched, presented, or sold, it is just a hobby.
You haven't actually poked the buzzer box if the box never feels the poke.
The sources use a wonderfully agonizing metaphor to describe this. Walking to Cleveland.
Yes.
If you live in New York and you decide to walk to Cleveland, you step out your front door and take a first step. That is starting. You walk 20 exhausting miles, your feet are covered in blisters, your muscles are screaming, and you collapse in a cheap motel for the night.
The next morning, the adrenaline is gone.
You are not done. You have to wake up and start again. Every single step on that highway is a new beginning. You have to keep starting day after day until you cross the city limits of Cleveland.
The long walk separates the true initiators from the people who are merely wearing the costume of an entrepreneur. And the text identifies two very distinct, very dangerous archetypes of people who use the illusion of starting to hide from the reality of finishing. Hypergo and hypergo.
Let's dissect the hypogo first. The hypogo is the person with a metaphorical notebook full of world-changing ideas. They are the professional brainstormer. They tinker with the business plan forever. They continuously refine the logo, but They never actually launch.
They carry those unexecuted ideas around like a heavy bag of rocks, using them to insulate themselves from any real-world criticism.
The psychology is fascinating. If they never launch, they can say, look at my genius ideas. You can't criticize me because I haven't officially launched yet. Just wait until it's perfect.
They are addicted to conceptualizing because concepts can't be rejected by the market. And then you have the inverse pathology, the hypergo.
The serial starters.
Yes, these are the serial starters who over-initiate specifically to avoid the grinding, unglamorous work of finishing. They will enthusiastically launch a revolutionary Zeppelin transit company on Monday. By Wednesday, things get difficult, so they drop it to file a patent for a new type of combustion engine.
But by Friday, they pivot to launching a notary delivery service.
Exactly. They generate massive amounts of initial friction and heat, but they never push through the inevitable dip, that valley of despair, to actually ship a finished product.
And what's wild is that both the hypogo and the hypergo, despite looking completely different on the surface, are driven by the exact same biological fear. They are terrified of intersection. They're terrified of shipping a finished product and having the market or their boss or their peers look at it and say, this isn't very good.
The magic of true instigation doesn't happen at the launch party. To illustrate this, the research references Scott McCloud's seminal book on visual storytelling, Understanding Comics. McCloud explains a profound concept. The real power of a comic book isn't what happens inside the meticulously drawn panels. The magic happens in the gutter, the blank white space between the frames.
Oh, I see. The artist draws a character throwing a punch in frame 1, and in frame 2, the villain is flying backward. But the reader's brain has to actively participate to fill in the violence, the speed, and the impact that occurred in that blank white gutter between the images.
Precisely. And in the context of our careers, the gutter is where the actual work of starting takes place. Anyone can schedule a flashy kickoff meeting with donuts and a slide deck. That's frame 1. And anyone can celebrate a successful launch. That's frame 2.
But the grueling, unglamorous, isolating work of continuing to start day after day, when the budget is cut, when the team is tired, when the lizard brain is begging you to quit, that all happens in the gutter.
Forcing yourself to stick to the plan and execute in the dark is the rarest skill in the modern economy.
Which brings us to a conclusion that might make some listeners uncomfortable, but it is undeniably powerful. The moral obligation to start.
This is a heavy point.
The argument here is that if you have a platform, if you have unique insight, if you see a squeaky hinge, and you choose to hide your spark from your team or your community out of fear, you are essentially stealing from them. The research states that withholding your initiative is morally equivalent to stealing a company laptop and fencing it on eBay.
It sounds like hyperbole, but it is a mathematically sound argument. The world is facing unprecedented, incredibly complex problems, from climate logistics to healthcare access to educational reform. Mediocrity and strict compliance to old rules will not solve them.
If you possess a better way, a potential solution, and you remain silent because you are afraid of the failure dance, you are actively depriving the world of your necessary contribution. You are choosing your own temporary ego protection over the advancement of your community.
There is a cautionary tale in the research about a young employee during his brief stint at Yahoo. He recognized that the company was siloed, so he took the initiative to organize a simple lunch meeting with 12 people from various departments just to connect, cross-pollinate, and brainstorm.
It was a tiny, low-stakes instigation.
Right. But when he returned to his desk, his manager pulled him aside, told him to cool it, and explicitly instructed him to just sit in his cubicle and await further instructions.
The author's advice for anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation is stark, uncompromising, and absolutely correct. If your manager tells you to stop initiating, you have two choices. You either ignore your boss and keep starting things anyway, accepting the consequences, or you update your resume and start looking for a new job immediately.
You cannot afford to let your career wither in an environment that actively suppresses the seventh imperative.
Now, if we look at everything we've discussed, the need to push through the fear, outsmart the lizard brain, and just ship the work. It sounds a lot like the famous Nike slogan, just do it. But there is a massive trap hidden in those three words, isn't there?
A huge trap.
Because if someone's listening right now feeling completely paralyzed by the weight of their corporate bureaucracy and their own internal resistance telling them to just do it, it implies that instigation is merely a matter of flipping a willpower switch. They feel like a dangerous oversimplification.
It is a massive oversimplification. The fatal flaw in just do it is the word just. It implies that taking initiative requires nothing more than a momentary surge of raw, brute force willpower. But for most of us, we aren't natural starters because we've spent 20 years in schools and jobs that explicitly trained us not to start, and we haven't been consistently rewarded for it.
You cannot reverse decades of conditioning with a burst of adrenaline. It takes systematic practice. It takes the conscious dismantling of the brainwashing step by step.
It's not about a momentary surge, it's about a structural change in your approach. The final practical takeaway here is that you have to stop asking for permission for every single ad hoc project. You are exhausting your political capital and your willpower by fighting the battle every single day. Instead, you need to buy the season's pass to initiation.
I love this concept. Think about the economics of a ski resort. You can choose to buy a daily lift ticket every single time you want to ski. But that requires a debate, a decision, a transaction, and a wait in line every single morning.
Or you can endure the pain of buying a season's pass once at the beginning of the year, and then you just walk onto the mountain whenever you want. The friction is removed.
Professionally, you need to make a singular, overarching, structural decision about your identity. Decide once that you are a person who starts things. Sell your manager on the fact that your core job function, your ultimate value to the company, is to be an initiator.
Okay, let's tie all these threads together because the ground we have covered today is foundational. The soul of this entire deep dive is a profound demystification. Starting is not a mystical trait granted by the cosmos to eccentric billionaires or Silicon Valley savants.
It is a highly functional, mechanical, everyday process. It is the simple, repeatable act of poking the buzzer box to see what the system does.
It requires abandoning the warm, comforting, yet ultimately fatal safety of compliance. It means violently rejecting the pick-me mentality and taking ownership of your own map. It requires accepting that you will inevitably be wrong, just as the original Starbucks model was wrong, but understanding that being aggressively wrong is the only empirical path to discovering what is right.
And most importantly, it is a relentless commitment to the long walk to Cleveland. It means stepping out of the stagnant pond and into the rapid flux of Google world. It means battling the evolutionary fear of your lizard brain every single morning by scheduling your instigation.
And it means repeatedly, relentlessly shipping your work through the unglamorous gutters of the process. Because ultimately you have a moral obligation to contribute your unique instigation to a world that desperately needs the friction of new ideas.
Now that we have laid bare the profound mechanics and the deep psychological barriers behind taking that crucial first step, you are left with a new, perhaps even more daunting challenge. You know how to start, but the ecosystem will fight back.
Exactly. Because once you finally step onto the highway and start walking to Cleveland, how do you ensure you don't lose your way or surrender when the resistance inevitably regroups, adapts, and fights back even harder?
That is exactly the battle plan we will uncover in our next deep dive. But until then, I want to leave you with the exact thought we started with, to let it marinate. Tomorrow morning, when you open your laptop or walk into your office or look at your community, well, when will be the last time you did something for the very first time? Think about it. Are you spending your entire life sweating the details of someone else's vision? Or are you the one actually building the stage?
Yeah, that is like the defining career question of our current era, honestly.
It really is. I mean, for generations, the default blueprint for success was just to wait in line. You know, you handed in your resume, you stood quietly, and you basically just prayed to be picked.
Right, the whole wait for your turn mentality.
Exactly. But the economic landscape is completely inverted. Today, the individuals who actually win, who thrive, are the ones who just stop waiting and decide to pick themselves.
They just bypass the line entirely.
Totally. So over the next hour or so, we're doing a deep dive into a really crucial distinction detailed in Seth Godin's work, specifically Chapter 3 of Poke the Box. We're going to unpack the exact difference between being an organizer and a promoter.
Which, I gotta say, is an essential paradigm shift for literally anyone navigating business today.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, understanding this separation isn't just some academic exercise. It is the literal dividing line between being an easily replaced commodity, someone whose skills can just be outsourced or automated, and becoming an indispensable force of nature in your industry.
Yeah, it's huge. So let's start right at the foundation of this problem, which is that ingrained expectation that we need permission to do anything meaningful.
The tyranny of the pick-me mindset.
Right. The tyranny of pick-me. And when you start looking for it, this industrial brainwashing is everywhere. I mean, we expect authors to wait for publishers to pick their manuscripts.
Yeah, or founders waiting for VCs to pick their pitch decks.
Exactly. And within corporate America, you have like millions of highly capable people sitting in cubicles doing really good work, just waiting for the executive team to tap them on the shoulder for a promotion.
And what's fascinating here is that the architecture of that mindset is entirely by design.
Wait, really?
Right.
Like intentionally designed?
Oh, completely. If you look at the origins of our modern educational and corporate systems, heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution, factory models, that sort of thing, the goal was never to create a workforce of independent initiators.
Because they needed people to just run the machines.
Exactly. The goal was to produce compliant components for a massive machine. The whole system was explicitly built to separate the planners at the very top from the doers at the bottom.
Right. So we are conditioned from what? Kindergarten? To raise our hand and wait to be called upon.
Yeah, raise your hand, ask to go to the bathroom, wait for the bell to ring. It's drilled into us.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more because there's a psychological layer here that I think is super interesting. Waiting to be chosen obviously feels really frustrating when you're stuck in it.
Oh, it's miserable.
It is. But the source material suggests there's actually a massive, almost subconscious comfort in that pick-me posture.
Well, yeah, because it completely absolves you of risk. Like, when you acknowledge the power of a gatekeeper and you just wait for them to act, you are effectively transferring all the ultimate responsibility off your own shoulders.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Think about the defensive brilliance of it. Let's say you write a novel, right? You submit it to 50 agents and they all reject it. Whose fault is it?
In your own mind, it's their fault.
Exactly. The industry is broken, or they just lack the vision to understand your genius. You remain entirely blameless.
You get to maintain your self-image as this brilliant, unrecognized talent without ever actually testing your work against the open market.
Spot on. And, the dynamic works exactly the same way, even if you do succeed in getting picked.
How so?
Well, let's say your boss assigns you to lead a major new initiative. If the project completely craters 6 months later, the pick-me paradigm gives your ego a built-in escape hatch.
Oh, I see. You can just rationalize it and say, well, they picked me.
Right. They assessed my skills, they decided I was ready, they gave me the assignment. It's a management failure, not a personal one.
That is so true. Adopting the posture of someone waiting to be picked is basically just a strategy to avoid the terrifying weight of total ownership.
It really is. It's a massive shield.
It kind of reminds me of, okay, think about being at a middle school dance.
Oh, God, the trauma.
Right. Everyone is lined up against the wall in the gym, absolutely terrified, just waiting for someone else to walk over and ask them to dance.
Yeah, the classic wallflower scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the person who actually has the best time, the one who actually gets to enjoy the music, is the one who just walks to the center of the floor and starts moving.
They initiate.
Yes.
Yes.
They initiate the dancing. They don't wait for permission from a partner.
That's a great analogy, because standing on the wall feels safe. If no one asks you, well, nobody asks you. It's out of your control. But walking to the middle of the floor alone, that's terrifying, because if people look at you weird, that's entirely on you.
Exactly. You own the rejection. But the practical takeaway here for anyone listening is that you have to reject the tyranny of being picked.
You really do.
The pick-me mindset is a trap. It feels secure because you don't have to steer, but you must actively choose to pick yourself before anyone else ever will.
Because honestly, the people steering the ship don't need you as much as they used to anyway. The economy has shifted.
Which brings us perfectly to the core dynamic of the chapter. If we accept that waiting is a losing strategy, we have to reevaluate the actual roles we're playing at work. And this is where the text draws that sharp line between the organizer and the promoter.
Yeah, this is a brilliant distinction because it separates two highly competent types of people based entirely on the relationship to momentum.
Right. So let's break down the specific example the author uses here. He introduces a woman named Jessica. Now, Jessica is a professional event organizer.
And she's very good at it.
Oh, she is exceptional. The text makes it very clear. If you need to run a 3-day industry conference, Jessica is the person you want at the helm.
She's the dream hire.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You hand her the parameters, the attendee list, the budget, the venue, the keynote schedule, and she will execute it flawlessly.
The catering will arrive exactly on time.
The audiovisual equipment won't fail. Every single name tag will be perfectly alphabetized. Defect-free work.
Her whole value proposition is the complete elimination of friction during execution.
Exactly. But, and this is the massive caveat to Jessica's business model, she is fundamentally reactive.
And completely reactive.
Her entire livelihood depends on waiting for a promoter to decide that a conference needs to exist in the first place.
Right. If a promoter doesn't have an idea, Jessica doesn't have a job.
Yes. If she gets hired frequently, she's successful, sure. But her days are mostly spent polishing her portfolio, pitching her services, and just hoping some promoter selects her out of a crowded marketplace of other really competent organizers.
Now, compare that to the promoter. The text contrasts Jessica with legendary promoters like, it uses Jerry Weintraub as an example.
Oh yeah, Jerry Weintraub, the legendary Hollywood producer and concert promoter.
Right. A guy who generated hundreds of millions of dollars over his career. So let's look at the mechanics of why that insane wealth disparity exists between the Jessicas and the Jerrys of the world.
Okay, let's look at it.
The promoter might possess the exact same baseline logistical skills as the organizer. They might be equally capable of managing a spreadsheet or, negotiating with a caterer.
Sure, they aren't necessarily smarter.
Exactly. But the promoter doesn't wait for a client to hand them a venue and a guest list.
They initiate it.
Precisely. The promoter is the one who wakes up on a Tuesday morning and says, you know what? There is a gap in the market. Let's rent a massive hall in Chicago this October. Let's book these 3 specific speakers, and let's charge people $1,000 a head to attend.
They create the event out of thin air.
Yes. And because they initiate the action, they dictate all the terms. They hold the power of the picker.
Right, they're the ones picking the Jessicas.
Exactly. They assume the financial risk, they take on the reputational risk, but because of that, they capture the vast, vast majority of the upside. They aren't just selling their time for an hourly rate like the organizer. They are creating a brand new asset.
But wait, let me push back on this a little bit. Because if we just strip away all the organizers, doesn't the entire system just collapse into chaos?
Well,
Like if everyone listening adopts this visionary promoter mindset and nobody actually knows how to negotiate the catering contracts or alphabetize the name tags, the conference is going to be an absolute unmitigated disaster. Doesn't the world desperately need Jessica?
Oh, absolutely. It desperately needs them. And that's a really crucial nuance to address here. The argument is not that organizational skills are useless or bad.
Okay.
The ability to execute complex logistics is incredibly valuable. However, the economic reality detailed in the text is that pure execution, on its own, is rapidly becoming a commodity.
Define how it's becoming a commodity in this specific context.
Okay, so a commodity is an economic good that has full or partial fungibility, right? Meaning the market treats instances of the good as equivalent, regardless of who produced them. A barrel of oil is a barrel of oil.
Right.
If your sole definition of quality as a worker is flawless execution without defects, you are in serious trouble today.
Because everyone can do it.
Basically, yeah. The modern global marketplace, especially now aided by software, AI, and global outsourcing it, has largely caught up to the standard of defect-free execution.
Oh, I see.
There are thousands of event organizers who can deliver a flawless conference. There's software that can alphabetize the name tags instantly. So if your competitor offers defect-free execution and you offer defect-free execution, how does the client choose?
They just choose whoever is cheapest.
Exactly. It's a race to the bottom
Well,
because there's no unique differentiator anymore.
so relying strictly on your ability to organize puts a hard, unyielding ceiling on your market value.
Exactly. The takeaway from the text isn't that you must abandon your organizational skills. Please, keep organizing. But you have to upgrade your operating system to include the promoter's mindset.
You have to add it to your toolkit.
Right. You can still be the person who meticulously manages the details, but you can no longer afford to just sit there waiting for someone else to hand you the blueprint. You have to become the person who draws the map, who creates the container for that organizational work to actually happen.
It's kind of like the difference between being a highly skilled general contractor who builds the house based on someone else's blueprints versus being the real estate developer who actually buys the land, envisions the entire neighborhood, and then also manages the construction.
That's a perfect way to look at it. The leverage is entirely in the initiation.
The initiation is the scarcest resource in the whole equation.
Yes.
Which brings us to a really fascinating concept in the text regarding what actually fuels this kind of initiation. Because if we know we need to stop waiting and we need to start acting as promoters, what is the actual fuel that makes that happen?
Right. What's the raw material?
Yeah. Economists have historically tracked very specific inputs that are required for production, right?
Yeah, the classic factors of production. If you look at traditional business theory, creating anything of value requires a very predictable set of inputs. You need an initial concept, you need a workforce, you need physical space, like a factory or an office building,
Raw material.
right? Raw materials, a distribution network, and crucially, you need financial capital to fund all of it.
And you can basically get a master's degree in managing any single one of those specific inputs. I mean, we have entire global industries dedicated just to logistics and distribution or just to financial capital and banking.
Sure, massive industries. But the author posits that in our current environment, all of those traditional inputs, the shiny factories, the venture capital money, the optimized supply chains, they are entirely inert without one specific overriding element.
Which the text calls instigation capital.
Instigation capital.
I love that phrase. It's essentially the courage to just say go. And the text frames this as the seventh imperative, which I think requires some deep unpacking because it explains exactly why so many highly educated, really capable people get permanently stuck in their careers.
It explains so much.
Yeah.
To really grasp the seventh imperative, we have to look at the first six, which are essentially the baseline rules of the modern workforce.
Okay, let's run through them.
So 1, be aware of your market. 2, be educated. 3, be connected. 4, be consistent in your output. 5, build a tangible asset or skill. And 6, be productive.
Those 6 imperatives are literally the exact curriculum of every school, university, and corporate training program in the entire world.
Exactly.
From the moment we enter the education system as toddlers, we are drilled on those exact 6 metrics.
Yeah.
Get your degree, network on LinkedIn, show up on time, and maximize your daily output.
And managers love it. They love employees who excel at those 6 imperatives. They make for incredibly reliable organizers. But the structural flaw in today's economy is that you can score a perfect 100% on those 6 metrics and still completely, utterly fail.
Because the environment is just too volatile.
Yes. Because just doing your job efficiently isn't enough when the job itself might be rendered completely obsolete by a new technology by next year. Those 6 imperatives, they build a really great engine, but they don't provide the spark.
The spark.
The 7th imperative, the willingness to actually instigate, to take a risk and ship something new, is almost entirely ignored by formal institutions.
But why? If it's the most valuable thing, if it's the spark, why isn't it taught in business school?
Because instigation introduces flux. It introduces unpredictability into systems that are explicitly designed to maintain stability.
I see.
Institutions crave predictability. Instigators disrupt it.
Let's ground this in the Craig Venter example from the source material because I think it perfectly illustrates the difference between perfect organization and actual instigation.
Oh, the synthetic biology example. It's
Yeah.
so good.
It is. So Craig Venter and his team are famous for their work on the human genome, but the text highlights their work in synthetic biology. They literally figured out how to use a computer to sequence and design the entire genetic code of a living organism.
Which is mind-blowing.
It is. They can synthesize DNA from scratch in a lab, base pair by base pair.
Which, if you think about it, is the ultimate triumph of those first 6 imperatives we just talked about.
Oh, totally.
It requires peak education, massive amounts of financial capital, perfect consistency, and flawless productivity to build synthetic DNA.
It is the ultimate feat of biological organization. But here's the mechanism that really matters.
Yeah.
When they finish synthesizing that perfect, flawless strand of artificial DNA in a petri dish, it doesn't do anything.
Nope.
It just sits there. It is chemically perfect, but it's entirely inert. To actually create a living, reproducing organism, Venter's team has to take that synthetic genome and physically insert it into the cytoplasm of an already living cell.
Right. They have to inject it into an environment that already possesses the motive force of life.
Exactly. Without that biological spark, that initial instigation, the perfect code is just dead matter in a dish.
And it's a profound metaphor for the modern corporate environment, isn't it?
How so?
Well, think about how many companies you've seen with millions of dollars in venture capital, state-of-the-art software, brilliant engineers from MIT, and absolutely perfect market research, yet they produce Absolutely nothing of consequence.
Oh, I've seen so many. They just burn through cash and fade away.
Exactly. They have all the structural components of success. They have the inert DNA, but they lack a promoter to provide the motive force. They lack someone willing to push the button, take the risk, and introduce the spark of instigation.
And without that spark,
Yeah.
without someone leading the charge, people naturally default to a state of just aimless wandering,
Always.
which connects directly to the research the text cites from the Max Planck Institute.
This blew my mind. Dr. Jan Suman conducted this incredible study on human navigation.
Yeah, studying the biomechanics of what actually happens when humans are stripped of navigational landmarks. Right, so he took subjects out into the Sahara Desert or into these dense, completely featureless forests in Germany, and he told them to just walk in a straight line.
Sounds easy enough.
Right, no compass, no sun visible through the clouds, no mountains in the distance to lock onto, just walk straight. And every single time, without fail, the subjects ended up walking in tight circles.
It's wild.
Even when they were absolutely 100% convinced they were maintaining a straight trajectory, their paths just looped right back on themselves.
And the underlying mechanics of that phenomenon are just fascinating. It comes down to microscopic biological asymmetries.
What do you mean?
Well, almost no human being has perfectly symmetrical legs. One leg is usually slightly longer, or the musculature is just marginally stronger on one side.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so when you have a visual anchor like the sun or a distant building, your brain is constantly microcorrecting your trajectory to compensate for that physical asymmetry. You don't even notice you're doing it.
But when you remove the external reference point,
The brain has nothing to calibrate against. So that tiny, tiny physical imbalance compounds with every single step. A millimeter of drift becomes a meter, and eventually you walk in a complete circle. Human beings literally cannot move in a straight line without a map or a star to guide them.
that is exactly what happens in a company or a team that lacks a promoter.
Exactly.
If a team doesn't have an instigator pointing at a horizon and saying, hey, we're going there, the natural biological and psychological default of the group is to walk in circles.
They will hold endless meetings.
Yes, they will endlessly revise the exact same documents, they will polish the exact same features for months, but they won't actually move forward.
The promoter acts as the external reference point. They draw the map. And because human nature possesses this deep subconscious desperation for direction, people will naturally follow the person who provides it.
So the practical, actionable takeaway for you listening is to really reassess the capital you currently have access to. You might feel restricted right now because you don't have a massive budget or a large team or specialized software.
But instigation capital, the willingness to be the person who draws the map and says go, is entirely free.
It requires no bank loan.
None. It is internally generated, and according to the core premise of this book, it is the single most highly valued currency in the connected economy, precisely because it is so incredibly rare.
Which naturally leads us to one of the most common psychological barriers people face when they hear this stuff.
Yeah.
There is this pervasive, really stubborn misconception that becoming a promoter or an instigator requires this massive, life-altering shift.
Right. The assumption is always that to be an initiator, you have to quit your job today, max out all your credit cards, and go found some disruptive tech startup in a garage.
Exactly. You have to be Steve Jobs, or you have to be Howard Schultz building the global Starbucks empire.
Yeah.
We associate initiations strictly with high stakes, bet the farm entrepreneurship.
And the source material explicitly, aggressively dismantles that myth.
How does it frame it?
It says entrepreneurship is certainly a form of initiation, yes, but it is merely a special case.
A special case.
Yeah, it's a very specific application of instigation that involves leveraging other people's capital and assets to construct a completely new, independent corporate entity. And that is a valid path. But initiation itself, the fundamental act of poking the box, is a universal requirement, regardless of your job title or where you happen to sit on a corporate organizational chart.
The text provides some incredibly grounded, everyday examples of what this actually looks like in practice. You don't have to be the CEO to instigate.
Not at all.
You could be a mid-level customer service representative handling inbound calls all day. If you notice that a specific script you're forced to read is making customers angry, and you take the initiative to rewrite that script, test it on 5 calls, see that it works way better, and then share it with your team, boom, you just acted as a promoter.
You instigated a change.
Exactly.
Or think about a receptionist noticing a bottleneck in how guests are processed in the lobby and just independently redesigning the flow. Or an assistant warehouse manager realizing a packing process is unsafe and fixing it.
The text even distills it down to fixing a squeaky hinge in the office.
I love that example.
It's so simple.
Yeah.
If a door hinge has been squeaking for 6 months and annoying 40 people every time someone goes to the break room, and you finally just bring in a can of WD-40 from home and fix it without being asked, that is a micro act of instigation.
It is.
But let me challenge this from a purely pragmatic standpoint, right? The author writes, "This is so obvious that it physically hurts me to type it." And yet almost nobody actually does it.
Right, they just let the hinge squeak.
Exactly. Why? If fixing the squeaky hinge or improving the call script is so obviously beneficial to everyone, why is our default behavior to just keep our heads down and ignore it? Isn't it because, historically speaking, corporations don't actually want us to instigate? They want absolute compliance.
Now you're touching on the historical reality of the pit boss's mentality, which the text definitely acknowledges.
Pit boss.
Yeah, you have to look at how businesses scaled during the 20th century to understand this fear. If you look at Henry Ford's original assembly lines, or Carnegie's massive steel mills, or even modern casino floors where the term pit boss comes from, the operational model was entirely reliant on extreme standardization.
Everyone doing exactly the same thing.
Exactly. In a high-leverage factory setting, a single worker suddenly deciding to innovate and build a part slightly differently doesn't increase productivity. It jams the entire assembly line down the hall.
Right. The cost of a deviation was catastrophic to the whole system.
Catastrophic. So management literally traded the potential upside of worker-led innovation for the absolute certainty of strict compliance.
They didn't want your ideas, they wanted your hand.
Exactly. The Detroit automakers created cultures so oppressive and rigid that unions eventually formed and basically said, fine, we will do exactly what is written in the contract and not 1 millimeter more. Symphony conductors ruled with such iron fists that world-class musicians learned to just play the exact notes on the page and never express any independent interpretation. Management demanded compliance, and they successfully engineered cultures that delivered it flawlessly.
Okay, so if that is the deep-seated DNA of the corporate world, why on earth should anyone listening stick their neck out right now? If the system was explicitly built to punish the receptionist for deviating from the manual, aren't we just inviting completely unnecessary risk by trying to be a promoter?
Because the economic environment that rewarded that pit boss model is virtually extinct.
Extinct.
Yes. The strategy of demanding strict compliance worked incredibly well when the primary goal was mass production of a static good. But the text argues that today, the downside of choosing compliance is fatal. You simply cannot outbland your competition anymore.
As Seth says, you can't get blander than bland.
Exactly. If your company's only strategic advantage in the marketplace is that you are dependable, predictable, and cheap, you are incredibly vulnerable.
Because someone is always cheaper.
Right. The moment a competitor in another country figures out how to be predictably cheap for slightly less money than you, or the moment an AI can automate that predictable task, you are wiped out.
Go on.
The text contrasts the old Ford assembly line, where they essentially built the exact same black Model T for nearly 2 decades without major changes, with what it defines as Project World.
Project World. I want to dive into this. The text points to organizations like Apple, Pixar, or design firms like IDEO as the modern standard for Project World.
Right. Think about the architecture of Project World. In these organizations, there is no eternal, unchanging assembly line.
There's no Model T.
No. The company is essentially just a fluid collection of highly committed people who come together to ship specific, distinct projects. Once a movie is finished at Pixar or a new iPhone is launched at Apple, that specific iteration of the organization dissolves.
And they move on to the next one.
Exactly. There is no endless pipeline of identical work to coast on. The only way the company continues to exist, and frankly, the only way you continue to have a job, is if someone immediately initiates the next project.
Coasting is literally impossible in Project World because value is only generated through new instigation.
The entire market valuation of these companies is based not on what they have already produced, but on the market's belief in their ability to continually initiate the next new thing.
That's a huge point.
And this shift isn't just happening in Silicon Valley or Hollywood. The gravity of the entire connected economy has shifted. If you are sitting at a legacy company right now, hiding behind a cog job mentality, just waiting for the assembly line to keep feeding you tasks, you are actively making yourself obsolete.
So the mandate here is to stop using your job title as a shield.
Yes.
You don't need a massive platform to be a promoter. You just need to identify a problem or an opportunity within your immediate radius and act on it. Fix the hinge. Rewrite the script, which the text broadly defines as the willingness to poke the box.
poking the box. Which brings us to the operational reality of how you actually do this.
Right, because it's easy to conceptually agree on a podcast that we should all be instigators. But how do you implement that on a random, rainy Tuesday morning when you're exhausted, your inbox is overflowing, and you're terrified of overstepping your bounds with a cranky manager?
This is where the source material introduces the concept of buying a season's pass to initiation, which honestly might be one of the most practical reframes in the entire book.
Let's explore the mechanics of that metaphor, the season pass.
Okay, so if you want to ski, you essentially have two options. You can buy a day ticket every single time you go to the mountain.
Right.
But that requires a micro decision every single time. You wake up, you have to evaluate the weather, you have to justify the $100 cost, you have to drive there, stand in the ticket line, and constantly recommit to the act of skiing. It creates immense friction.
And because of that friction, you inevitably end up skiing way less often. You just stay in bed.
Exactly. The alternative is buying a season's pass up front in September. You make the financial and psychological commitment once. And because the sunk cost is already paid, the friction is gone.
You just wake up, grab your gear, and go straight to the lift.
Right. The decision has already been made for the entire year.
Applying that to your career means you have to change your fundamental default posture. Because if you try to initiate on an ad hoc basis where every single time you have a new idea, you have to agonizingly debate whether to bring it up, you carefully craft a pitch, and you nervously ask your boss for permission to try this one specific little thing.
You will burn out.
You will. The emotional toll of constantly asking for permission day by day is just too high.
So instead of asking for permission for every individual action, you change the meta agreement of your employment.
How do you do that?
You have a defining conversation with your manager or your team where you establish your role up front. You say, listen, my core function here isn't just to manage the status quo. My job is to be an initiator. I am going to continually look for things to improve, and I am going to run small experiments to see what works.
You sell them on the concept of your instigation once.
Ask once, do many.
Ask once, do many. I love that. You secure a season's pass to poke the box. You shift your default state from passive compliance to active instigation.
And to really understand what it means to poke the box, we have to look at the literal story the author tells about his uncle. It's such a perfect encapsulation of how we lose our natural instinct for discovery as we grow up.
Oh, the uncle with the PhD from MIT who builds a custom toy for a baby.
Yes, that story.
So this uncle builds a literal buzzer box. But because he's an MIT engineer, it doesn't look like a cute Fisher-Price toy.
No, it's not brightly colored plastic.
No. It is this heavy, intimidating metal contraption. It has a thick black power cord that plugs straight into the wall socket. It's covered in industrial toggle switches and bright indicator lights.
To any rational adult, it looks like a piece of testing equipment from a nuclear reactor.
Right. It looks dangerous. But they take this terrifying box and they put it right into the crib with the toddler.
And consider the child's reaction, which is entirely devoid of that industrial brainwashing we discussed earlier.
The kid doesn't hesitate for a second.
Mm-hmm.
The toddler doesn't look around for an instruction manual. They don't call a committee meeting to discuss the strategic implications of the box.
They don't ask for permission.
They just crawl over and start poking it. They flip a switch and a green light turns on. The brain registers the connection. Okay, action A causes result B. They flip another switch, and a loud buzzer sounds.
They are engaging in rapid, unfiltered cause and effect testing.
Exactly. They figure out exactly how the complex system works simply by interacting with it over and over.
The text highlights that this is precisely how complex technical skills, like computer programming, are actually mastered in the real world.
Yeah, you can't just read about it.
No. There is no linear, step-by-step textbook that can magically make you a senior software engineer. The best programmers in the world learned by aggressively poking the box. They write a block of code, they run it, and they see how the compiler reacts.
Usually it breaks.
Right? It crashes. So they change a variable, run it again, and observe the new result. They learn the boundaries and capabilities of the system through relentless, iterative interaction.
So the takeaway is that your career is a buzzer box. The market is a buzzer box. Your clients, your boss, your industry, they're all complex systems that cannot be perfectly understood through theory alone. You only figure out what actually works by poking them and observing the response.
Which raises the critical psychological question. If poking the box is the most effective way to learn and grow, Why do adults stop doing it?
Why do we freeze?
Right? Why do we look at the metaphorical buzzer boxes in our offices and just freeze in terror?
This was honestly the most clarifying part of the text for me. It comes down to a fundamental linguistic and psychological confusion between two concepts: flux and risk. We've completely tangled these two ideas in our mind.
We really have. Let's untangle them because it's the key to overcoming the fear of initiation.
Okay, let's start with flux.
So in a literal physical sense, flux is simply movement or flow. The text uses a great thermodynamics analogy. If you take a freezing cold ice cube and drop it into a mug of boiling hot tea, you immediately create flux.
The temperatures react.
Right. The heat energy rapidly transfers from the water into the ice. The state of the materials is changing, but there is no inherent risk in that movement. The water isn't winning and the ice isn't losing. It is simply molecular change.
So flux is just movement and change without moral judgment. How does the text define risk?
Risk involves the potential for a negative outcome. It implies stakes. Risk means you've invested something, money, reputation, time, and there is a tangible possibility that you could lose it.
Okay, so flux is movement. Risk is the potential for loss.
Precisely. Now, human beings are evolutionarily wired to fear loss. We are intensely risk-averse creatures by nature.
Keeps us alive.
Exactly. The problem is that over the course of our lives, our brains have improperly conflated these two distinct concepts. Because periods of high risk often involve a lot of chaotic movement, we have subconsciously concluded that all movement equals risk.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
We look at a situation that is in a state of flux, a changing market, a new technology, a shifting organizational structure, and our lizard brain just screams, movement equals danger.
And what is our natural defense mechanism when we sense danger? We freeze. We try to stand perfectly still. We refuse to poke the box because poking creates movement, and we have falsely convinced ourselves that preventing movement is the exact same thing as preventing failure.
Which is the ultimate tragic irony of this entire dynamic.
Why?
Because the text points out a brutal reality. The macro environment is already in a permanent state of rapid flux. The river is moving, whether you like it or not.
So if you are standing in the middle of a rapidly rushing river, and you decide that the best way to stay safe is to lock your knees and stand perfectly rigid against the current, you aren't avoiding risk. You are actually maximizing it.
Exactly. By standing still in a moving environment, you are mathematically guaranteeing that the current will eventually overpower you, or that a massive piece of debris floating down the river will smash into you. Standing still in a state of flux is the most dangerous posture you can adopt.
Wow.
Conversely, a log that is floating with the current, adapting to the movement, experiences far less turbulence than the rock trying to resist it.
So the practical application here is that you have to actively decouple those concepts in your mind. You have to get comfortable with flux. You have to buy the season's pass to instigate, knowing full well that poking the box means you are going to generate some wrong answers.
You have to embrace the statistical certainty of being wrong.
Can't avoid it.
You really can't. The text lists all these prolific instigators, people like Oprah Winfrey, Mark Cuban, Steve Carell. When we look at them, we only see the massive successes. But their careers are littered with failures.
Oh, tons of them.
Oprah has launched entire networks and shows that completely flopped. Mark Cuban has invested in countless businesses that went bankrupt. Steve Carell performed in dozens of failed pilots and sketches before finding his breakout roles.
But they succeeded precisely because they refused to stand still. They stayed in motion. There's a fantastic quote in the text about this. The fact that it doesn't work every time should give you confidence because it means you're doing something that frightens others.
That's a great line.
If every single idea you have works perfectly, you aren't actually initiating anything new. You are just executing safe, commodity-level organization. Being wrong occasionally is the empirical proof that you're actually operating on the edge of your potential.
It proves that you are actually creating rather than just polishing.
Yes, the polishing trap. The text makes a very sharp distinction between the hard work of shipping a project and the seductive trap of polishing. Let's talk about that because I think everyone listening is guilty of this at some point.
Oh, everyone is guilty of it.
So the author gives an anecdote about a colleague whose smartphone is constantly chiming with Twitter and social media notifications.
Yeah.
And this person instantly drops whatever they are doing to reply, retweet, and engage. They are constantly polishing their network, constantly maintaining their digital relationships.
And the trap is that polishing feels exactly like real work.
It does.
It requires effort, it occupies your time, and it gives you a tiny dopamine hit of accomplishment. You feel productive.
But the economic return on polishing diminishes incredibly fast.
Mhm.
Whether you're polishing a piece of physical furniture or endlessly revising a PowerPoint deck that is already 95% done, or tweaking your LinkedIn profile for the 4th time this week, doing it twice as much does not make it twice as good.
Not at all.
It quickly stops being about improving the work and morphs into a sophisticated stalling tactic.
It is a defense mechanism. It's deployed by what the text refers to as the lizard brain, the amygdala, the prehistoric, survival-focused part of our brain that perceives the vulnerability of putting a new idea into the world as a literal physical threat.
It thinks you're going to die.
Literally.
Yeah.
The lizard brain doesn't want you to ship the project because shipping invites criticism, rejection, and flex. So it convinces you that you just need to polish it a little bit more. Don't send the proposal yet. Let's just review the fonts one more time to be safe.
Just one more review. Which is why instigation without the discipline of completion is totally useless. You have to poke the box, but you also have to follow through.
You have to ship.
You have to ship. And the text brings up the tragic historical example of Ignaz Semmelweis to illustrate this exact point, which is just wild.
The Semmelweis story is a perfect, sobering case study in the limits of pure instigation.
For context for the listeners, Ignaz Semmelweis was a physician working in maternity wards in the mid-1800s. And through observation, he figured out something revolutionary. If doctors simply washed their hands with a chlorinated solution between performing autopsies and delivering babies, the mortality rate from puerperal fever plummeted.
It was a massive, world-altering insight.
He instigated a completely new paradigm of medical hygiene.
He had the ultimate instigation capital, but he completely failed to get the idea to spread during his lifetime.
And the text points out why he failed. It wasn't because the science was wrong. The science was perfect. It was because of how he handled the friction that inevitably follows instigation.
Right. When the medical establishment pushed back because his theory implied that doctors were unwittingly killing their own patients, which obviously upset them, Semmelweis didn't adapt.
He just got angry.
The text notes that he essentially threw a tantrum. He called the other doctors murderers. He was arrogant. He refused to clearly explain his data. And when the resistance became too heavy, he just stopped trying to ship the idea. He walked away from the work.
He had the spark, but he let his ego and his frustration short-circuit the follow-through. He didn't embrace the discipline of shipping. He retreated when the environment pushed back.
The lesson there is that instigation isn't just the explosive moment of starting. It's the stamina to keep pushing until the idea connects.
You have to finish it.
You have to finish. The text emphasizes that the first rule of doing work that matters is to go to work on a regular basis. You have to make your schedule and commit to the process before you start so that when the lizard brain tries to talk you into endlessly polishing or just giving up because someone criticized you, you have a structural defense against it.
You have to treat the act of shipping with the exact same rigorous consistency that a factory worker applies to the assembly line. The difference is you are mass-producing initiative instead of widgets.
Mass-producing initiative. I love that.
So let's pull all these threads together. Over the course of this deep dive, we've unraveled the industrial brainwashing that taught us to wait for permission.
The whole pick-me trap.
Right. We've contrasted Jessica's flawless but reactive organization with Jerry Weintraub's wealth-generating promotion. We've explored why the seventh imperative instigation capital is the missing spark that makes all of the resources valuable.
The spark in the petri dish.
Exactly. We dismantled the myth that you need to be a CEO to instigate, and we looked at how to buy a season's pass to poke the buzzer box, even when it means embracing flux and looking foolish.
When you synthesize all of these concepts, the core message of this chapter is about recognizing a massive, irreversible shift in economic gravity.
It's totally shifted.
For centuries, power belonged to the people who hoarded the physical resources, who managed the checklists, and who stood at the gates granting permission. The era of the pit boss and the stable, predictable assembly line is over. That leverage is just gone. Today, power belongs exclusively to the promoters.
It belongs to the people who refuse to wait.
Exactly. It belongs to the individuals who unbrainwash themselves, who recognize that generating forward momentum is the only truly defensible business asset left, and who are willing to absorb the friction of the seventh imperative to actually make things happen.
You have to become the motive force in your own environment.
You must secure your season's pass to instigation and understand that while taking action might occasionally result in failure, standing still is the only guaranteed route to obsolescence.
Well said. Next time on the Deep Dive, we'll explore the mechanics of what happens when you actually adopt this posture and start shipping your ideas consistently. We'll look at how to maintain that instigation engine over the long haul without burning out or alienating the people around you.
It's a vital continuation. We'll be focusing heavily on the endurance required to sustain this mindset.
But before we wrap up, I want you to apply this directly to your reality right now. Look at your desk. Look at your calendar for this week. Or think about the project that is currently causing you the most anxiety. What is the heavy, intimidating buzzer box in your professional life right now?
What's the thing you're avoiding?
Yeah, the thing you are staring at,
Yeah.
terrified to touch, because you aren't exactly sure what it will do and no one has explicitly given you permission to play with it. What would actually happen if, tomorrow morning, you stopped waiting to be picked away, walked right up to it and pushed a button?
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.